So, welcome, my fellow human beings. I'm going to go straight into this speech because I've been warned by the Women's War Office that I am not, on no account, to waffle. Charming, eh? So how did we meet Mr. Howe? Well, I must admit, when I first ever clapped eyes on Roberto, I wasn't keen. Not at all. In fact, I thought he'd be some sort of care in the community. He was always in the blues bar, sat in between the phone and the fag machine, whooping and hooting, rowing and raucousing with what half the time seemed some imaginary friend. And he'd always cast you that switchblade stare as you swerved round him to get to the toilet. Very unnerving. No, I definitely thought, he's not for me. Basically because he looked and sounded 3 parts mentally insane. But then we were quickly drawn together by the same traits of tragedy. Those being our femme fatales. You see, every artist has them, and they usually match their colour periods. But they're in. I.e., Picasso had blue, Klimt had gold, and Rob, well, he had black, or rather a dark shade of black. You see, he was keeping the company of a raven-haired, raven-hearted muse, and, well, one of them was a volatile dipsomaniac who we called the Black Narcissus, although she was white, and the other one was called the Doom in the Room, a pansexual fascist who dressed in leather and read Nietzsche and Mein Kampf. Total Nazi. Fortunately for me, my own femme fatale, a Spanish hot blood, left for Barcelona after burning part of the flat down with some love letters and attacking me. But Roberto, well, I was fully expecting to walk into his studio and find him stretched out as the canvas onto which his 2 malevolent muses would be painting his still life using his own still blood. But still, our dark triad was brought together, and we began murdering the midnight hours and slaughtering our sobriety in some sort of vain attempt to try and heal our hemorrhaging hearts. What we really should have done was to buy a couple of bulletproof vests and go into hiding, for it wasn't long after this that I was hospitalized and given a police caution at my bedside, and Roberto, well, he was constantly dodging the bullets. He could have done with a bodyguard and a crash helmet. But eventually, one of his muses or nut jobs did leave and was later sectioned, which relieved the pressure somewhat on our self-preservation society. One thing that we all did have in common, our trio, was that we shared the same shrink and swapped and swallowed the same Seriton Smarties. Still, our bond grew stronger and stronger, and most nights we'd stay up while the wee small hours and chat in what became known as the Dawn Confessions, due to us keeping company with an ex-seminarian priest from the Vatican, Rome, Neil. He was acting at that time as our spiritual advisor, although he was slaking down more alcohol than we were. The dreadful old and filthy got the better of all of us. You see, we had one rather big problem between us, and that was that basically we had gullets as long as neck scarves that stretched all the way down to our stocking feet. And every time we started drinking, it sort of turned into an attempt at suicide. But still, we did have the priest on hand to issue the last rites if any of us were to slip or drown under the deep, dark waters of wine. The wonderful thing about Rob was he had an open heart and he read like an open book. He was also open all hours. You could wander around to Rob's at any time of day or night, and there he would be, our very own mentoring sage, with whom we all felt as though we were coming of age. Oh yes, we'd done done quite a bit of travelling, me and Neil, our seminarian scholar, but, well, we weren't worldly wise on the domestic terrain front. We hadn't had wives or children, and we'd never lived alongside an all-swinging 60s hippie from an ashram, who, like all good gurus, was totally classless. He was without bias. Even though he'd been an officer's son and privately educated, he wasn't at all snobbish. Indeed, he was a spiritual, soulful, good Samaritan who offered shelter and support to many, including myself. The great thing was, for me, Roberto was a brother, a mother, a father, and a sister all rolled into one. It was quite wonderful, and he was so welcoming. Rob also threw the most magnificent parties. In fact, his life was one big world party. And he also carried the knowledge on everyone in Harrogate. He knew where the bullets, and the bodies, and the buckets of blood be buried. We once said of Rob, if any one of our crew ever reached a position of power or privilege, then we would definitely have to sort of have dear Rob assassinated to try and keep a tin lid on the terrible truth. You see, everyone had passed through his apartment. It was a transient stage upon which we all danced. I mean, I arrived one night to find the ex-Lord Mayor and the Chief of Police dancing semi-naked across the disco floor. Oh yes, Robert was certainly open. Well, it was an open bar and an open door policy to everyone. I myself, under Rob's guiding wing of tutelage, had dropped out of a disciplined life, working aboard super yachts, to become this Takapuna tramp who was living as a beatnik in some sort of hippie squat, sharing space and saliva with every leftover god-awful Lady Godiva that he'd left behind. But to me, well, it was just a magnificent mayhem of madness with Rob. We lived like two born-again teenagers. As he used to say, these may not be the best of times, but it is the only time that we're going to get. So remember, there's no tomorrows, it's just today, this is it. It's not a dress rehearsal, and you're a long time dead. And he certainly taught us how to live life on a ledge. Or me. He would indeed take you to the edge of the ledge and give you a gentle push to see if you could even fly. And you can always tell when someone's becoming a legend in their own lifetime, because, well, people begin to write and they talk. They talk about you whether it be good or bad. It doesn't matter. They still talk about you. And they write prose, poetry, and songs of your many exploits as though you be a folkloric hero. And for this reason, I say that Rob has become sort of immortalized, not just in the normal way of passing across his DNA in the usual form of children and grandchildren, as he already has, of course, but also aesthetically. He's now become immortal through his art, which, with him being so prolific and professional in this lifelong endeavour, it sort of now spans time, tide and terrain across the entire globe. The wonderful thing, his work is everywhere, especially with everyone he ever met. Recently I said to Rob, when he mentioned being so far away from us, living out in the Czech Republic, I recently told him, I said, well, your work hangs on every wall in Old H Gate. I myself wake up to you. I fall asleep with you. The first thing I see and the last thing I see is you. And hopefully till my dying day it always will be. So to me, you see, Rob, well, he will always be that beautiful work of art which I shall forever hang on the empty walls of my heart. His son Greg told me that his palette was still wet with paint in his final hours. He'd been working through the pain and suffering, and due to this dedication, well, we all have part of him hung on our walls. We also had a motto which only Rob stuck to. He was the only constant out of all of us. He was there, always there. We said of Rob that he was the Bohemian fugitive that rebelled against the forces of conformity that would have enslaved him into a life of convention. Forever and ever he remained obstinate in exile. And indeed he did, moving to live in Bohemia with a beautiful Bohemian woman called Miri, who's here today, who he admitted to me had saved him from himself, his wild, wild self. Well, I say this to you, my dear, dear friend. Thank you for saving me from myself, you beautiful, beautiful Bohemian. God bless you. I shall see you on the other side. All my love. S.